down, shut me out when I needed you. Oh, oh, I'm gonna burn this bridge. I ain't never coming back. No, I ain't never coming back. No, no, no. That girl you know is gone. You can see it in the past. Oh, I ain't never coming back. No, no, no. You lit this fire in me because you never believed that there was fire in me. Now you can't put it out. I'm gonna burn this bridge. I ain't never coming back. No, I ain't never coming back. No, no, no.
Sell the product at different price points, with of course different features. So like I suggested, some will have 16 gigabytes of internal storage, some will have 32 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes, and now you get 128 gigabytes. But we could segment the market by demographics, and the reason why that's significant is because what we would have found out by research is that there are differences. There are differences amongst those segments based on age. And also, what are some other demographics? Some other demographic characteristics that we could use to segment the market? Marissa? Well, that would be geographic, right? So we could also segment the market based on geographics. But what about demographics?
Gender.
The gender. So gender would be a significant way to segment the market. So males and females, men and women, they have different needs and wants. Is that reasonable? So when you go into the store, see, even I know this much, you have shampoo for men and shampoo for women, right? Right? I told you I know a lot about shampoo. They have shampoo for men and shampoo for women. So what have they done? Obviously, that's an example of segmenting the market based on gender. What else? Race? Yeah, absolutely. So the needs and wants of different races and ethnicities varies. Doesn't mean that there isn't any commonality. Of course, the product is going to be similar, but what the company needs to do is to modify the product so it's relevant to that particular race or ethnicity. And in the United States, that's particularly relevant. In other countries, the population is very homogeneous, which means that everybody is very similar. They don't have the type of diversity that we have in the United States. And importantly, in the United States, the level of diversity is very substantial. So it's not that you have some level of diversity, it's that, for example, let's say the percentage of African Americans in the United States is pushing 15%. That's a very large segment. And the percentage of Hispanics in the United States is also very substantial. The percentage of Asian Americans is also growing very rapidly. So those demographics are substantial and relevant to marketers. So we need to target our products. One size does not fit all. We have to customize our product to meet the needs of particular segments. So demographics, geographics, Marissa said that geographics is one way to segment the market. So based on where you live, the region, the country. Yes, go ahead. What was that? Behavioral. So we could segment the market based on what's called behavior. So behavioral segmentation. So demographic segmentation, geographic segmentation, behavioral segmentation. What would be an example of behavioral segmentation? Buying online or buying in the store. And what else?
Smoking, non-smokers, or drinking,
Well, I think you're starting to talk more about what we call psychographic segmentation, which has to do more with lifestyle, hobbies, interests. But take, for example, usage rate. So a great example of behavioral segmentation is usage rate, which means what? That the level of consumption varies. Not everybody consumes the same level of orange juice, do they? Don't we have some that are low consumers, some that are moderate, and some that are heavy users of orange juice? Light, moderate, heavy users. So the usage rate is another important way to segment the market. What we need to do is identify the light users, the moderate users, the heavy users. We need to understand who those people are. And why do we care about segmenting the market based on the usage rate? Why is that important? Because it's kind of interesting to find out that 20% of our customers are light users and 30% are moderate users and 50% are heavy users. So that's interesting. I think so. That's kind of interesting. But more importantly, we said it needs to be actionable. What's actionable about that? What's actionable about knowing that 50% of our customers, well, 50% of the market is heavy users? Well, 30% are moderate users, or 20% are light users. So the amount of orange juice that they consume is small relative to other individuals. Why do we care about that?
Marketing research leads to profit.
So we've done the marketing research, and this is what we found out. We found out that 20% of the market is light users, 30% is moderate, and 50% is heavy users. That adds up to 100, doesn't it? Just checking. Does it? You're not sure. 50,000 is what percentage of 500,000? Yeah? You sound a little bit more confident now. That might be one of the questions on the exam. Yeah, more than likely. But you guys are good at guessing, right? So, what do you think? What are we going to do with that information?
Offer larger size containers.
So maybe one of the things that we could do is increase the size of the container that the product is sold in. That's more relevant to the consumer. So we're not going to just sell orange juice in 16-ounce containers, but maybe now, since we know that there are heavy users, that their consumption level of orange juice is high, that maybe we need to start selling it in 1-gallon containers. So not 16 ounces, but 128 ounces, right?
Offer delivery service?
Delivery service for those that are heavy users? Yeah, maybe.
For different brands or different types. Everyone has their own preference.
So different brands of orange juice? So as a retailer, certainly we want to have offered different brands. So we're going to have what? Tropicana. We're going to have Minute Maid. Simply Orange. So we're going to carry different brands of orange juice. Yeah, absolutely.
Research on the last user and try to find more.
Yeah, so we want to find out why those that aren't heavy consumers, that aren't heavy users, why they don't consume a lot of orange juice. And
You could spend more money on advertising, targeting the heavy users.
yeah, you could spend more money on advertising to reinforce and reassure those that are heavy users, because we don't want them to have buyer's remorse. We don't want them to have post-cognitive dissonance, which is buyer's remorse. Right? We don't want them to have buyer's remorse. We want to reassure them, but also we're going to spend more money on advertising to reach those that are light users, to get them to increase their level of consumption. Maybe they're not aware that orange juice now has calcium, which is historically a key benefit for what product? Milk! So we could increase the advertising to try and get the light users to increase their level of consumption. That's very important. So we need to identify those segments. We need to do a behavioral segmentation and understand the usage rates. But it can't just be interesting, it's got to be actionable. We need to be able to communicate, we need to advertise and communicate with the light users, for example, to get them to increase their level of consumption. So it's not just, oh wow, 20% are light users, okay. We have to do something about that. The good news is, we can. We can. So we're going to advertise more. Maybe the issue is price. So maybe we should do what you had suggested before. Drop a coupon. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe orange juice is too expensive. What other ways can we segment the market in terms of behavioral segmentation? Another type of behavioral segmentation is known as benefit segmentation. So we could segment the market based on benefits. Take, for example, toothpaste. Haven't they demonstrated that they segmented the market based on benefit? Well, what we need to do is to go into Target, for example, or Duane Reade, or CVS, and we could see on the shelf what they've done to bring to life their benefit segmentation. So you've segmented the market based on benefit. What does that mean? So, well, we identify different benefits that consumers want from toothpaste. What are they? Good.
Pro enamel, whitening, and sensitivity.
Whitening, sensitivity, what else?
Cavity
Cavity
prevention.
prevention,
Flavor.
flavor, plaque control, tartar control, fresh breath. All of those are different benefits that consumers want from toothpaste. So that being said, what did they do? So you do market research to find that out. They probably did focus groups, which is qualitative research. And then they did quantitative research, which includes questionnaires. So they did questionnaires. Anybody here ever do a questionnaire? So based on their research, they found out that there's different segments in the market, in the toothpaste market. And what they did was, they, based on their benefit segmentation, they developed different products to meet the needs of each one of those segments. So they have a toothpaste, Colgate and Crest, they each have a toothpaste that's positioned in the market as whitening teeth. That toothpaste, that product will whiten teeth. And they also have another toothpaste that on the packaging you can see clear as day, it says that it fights tartar, and one that fights plaque, and one that freshens breath. So that's an example we could see in the marketplace of benefit segmentation. That's a great illustration. So different ways that we could segment the market: demographic segmentation, geographic segmentation, psychographic segmentation, behavioral segmentation. All of those are ways that we can segment the market. They're not the only ways, but those are some good places to start when we want to segment the market. And the reason why we do that is because segmenting the market is going to enable us to identify opportunities, and if we act upon that research and bring products to market and brand products accordingly, then we're going to be able to increase sales. Didn't we say that that was one of our marketing metrics? Was sales. Don't we want to sell more products? Don't we want to generate more profit? Silence means agreement. I'll take that as a yes. All right, so segments, we want segments to be large. So a segment should be large, reachable, with similar needs and wants, and whose members respond to the marketing mix in a similar way.
Is it criteria?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is identify, before we can talk about the selection criteria, what we want to do is like discuss what we consider to be an ideal segment. So we want segments to be large. We want segments to be large, reachable. What does that mean, reachable? Accessible, so they got to be accessible, which means we need to be able to communicate with them, for example, through advertising. So to identify a segment, but them not be able to see our commercials or our print ads or our billboards is a really big problem. So it really needs to be something that's actionable. It can't just be interesting. Because if it's just interesting and we can't reach them, then it's meaningless to identify a segment really that's not reachable. We need to be able to communicate with them. So we identify them, then we want to communicate with them. Isn't the messaging in our commercial, for example, going to be different for heavy users than for light users? Are we going to be saying the same thing in the commercial that's targeted towards heavy users as light users? So remember, what we're trying to achieve is something different. Light users, we're trying to get them to increase their consumption. So is it the message, what we talk about in the commercial, is it going to be different than what we tell people who are already heavy users that are consuming a significant amount of orange juice every week? Yeah. So we need to be able to reach the segments that we identify. So they need to be large, reachable, have similar needs and wants. So within a segment, let's say like those age groups that we identified, the needs and wants need to be similar. Now, outside of those segments, amongst those segments, the needs and wants are going to be different. And they're going to be large, reachable, with similar needs and wants, and they're going to respond to the marketing mix in the same way. So that means that they're going to buy the product, for example, online. So most of the consumers in that segment are going to purchase the product, let's say, online. Another segment, significant percentage of them might purchase the product at wholesale clubs, and others might purchase them in grocery stores, or convenience stores, or drugstores, or specialty stores. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody in that segment, so we said homogeneous, but they're not going to be identical. It's not a segment full of clones, but most of the people, so we're generalizing, most of the people are going to respond to the marketing mix in the same way, which means that they would purchase the product at a given price. So some in that segment will purchase at $500, but not at $800. That's in a different segment. And most of them will purchase online, not in the store. They'll purchase it in a virtual store, not in a physical store. For example, okay, so now that we've created those segments, now we need to decide how we're going to select them. So we said that we want them to be large, reachable, with similar needs and wants, and respond to the marketing mix in a similar way. But now that we've identified the segments, we have to decide which segments we're going to focus on. Because more than likely, we're not going to be able to focus on every segment. So let's say we decide to introduce a new line of clothing. We're not going to be able to introduce pants and jeans and long sleeve shirts, and not just any long sleeve shirt, but long sleeve shirts that are made of cotton, and some that are made of silk, and some that are made of polyester, and some that are made of linen. And of course, some of them are stripes, and some of them are red, and some of them are blue, and some of them are yellow, and some of them are green. So you can see there's a lot of complexity. We're not going to be able to introduce a line that's going to penetrate every segment. So what I'm suggesting is one of the ways that you could segment the apparel line is by the product type, which is pants, shirts, right? Those would be two key segments. Are you going to be able to roll out an entire product line for shirts and pants, and for men and women? So probably not. So we need to decide which segments are we going to focus on. So we said that we could segment the market based on gender. So if we segment the market based on gender, now we need to decide whether or not we're going to introduce a line of apparel for both men and women. So what do we need to look at? Well, one of the things is the size of the market. So the criteria we're going to use to help select whether or not we're going to introduce a line of apparel for men or for women is the size of the market. So how large is the market? So which market is larger? Is the market for clothing larger for men or for women? We need to understand that. And we need to look at the growth rate. So independent of the size of the market, we need to understand how fast or how slow the market is growing. So it's not enough to understand that it's $5 billion, that the market is $5 billion. We need to understand, is it growing 1% per year, 10% per year, 20% per year, 50% per year? So what do you think? What would we decide? Are we going to select a market that's growing 1% per year or 30% per year? Which do you think is better? 30% probably, right? Not all other things being equal, but then we could also look at Ella, right? We could also look at the size of the market. So which is better? A small market that's growing rapidly or a large market that's not growing? Those are things that we need to consider. So one segment might be 5 billion, but growing 30% per year. The other segment might be not 5 billion, it might be 15 billion, but it's growing 1% per year. So we need to remember what we're talking about now is, now that we segmented the market, is how we're going to decide which segments to penetrate. Because we might have identified 2 segments, we might have identified 10 segments. So we need to look at the size of the market, we need to look at the growth rate, we need to look at the competitive set. So in each of those segments, who is our competition? Who are our competitors? So let's switch examples and go back to our example about beverages. So we segment the market by product type, and we identify different products. Water, what else? Orange juice, milk, and soda, sports drinks, energy drinks, and of course, those are the non-alcoholic beverages. Then we could look at alcoholic beverages. But just based on the non-alcoholic beverages, we've identified what? How many is that? Almost like 10 different segments. Well, we need to decide which one of those, or how many of them, are we going to try to penetrate. Are we going to try to sell to all those segments? Are we going to try to introduce energy drinks, sports drinks, milk, orange juice, water, soda? Are we going to try to sell to all of those segments? Or are we going to have to select, which in marketing referred to as targeting? We're going to have to target specific segments that we're going to penetrate. So we're going to have to target specific segments. And we're going to look at the size of each one of those segments. And we're going to look at their growth rate. And we're going to look at the competitive position. So where we are relative to the competition. So in a given segment, who are we competing against? Are we competing against Coke and Pepsi? Or are we competing against XYZ company? So are we going up against a large, successful marketing powerhouse? Or are we going up against small competitors? So is the market highly fragmented or is it highly concentrated? So we need to understand our competitive position. And what else? The cost to reach the segment. We need to consider how much is it going to cost us to reach that given segment? How much is it going to cost us to penetrate the orange juice segment? And is it going to cost less to penetrate the segment where we would sell milk to consumers? And then we also need to look at the compatibility. How does us penetrating the orange juice segment, how compatible is that with our organization's resources and capabilities? So in selecting a particular segment, we have to look at the size of the market, we have to look at the growth rate, we have to look at our competitive position, we have to look at, what else? The cost of reaching the segment. For example, how much are we going to have to spend on advertising? And what else? And the compatibility. How compatible penetrating that segment is going to be with the rest of our organization. So does it make sense? Is there going to be a good fit? Selling orange juice and milk. Or maybe we should sell tequila. So we'll sell orange juice, milk, and tequila. But only top shelf, right? And vodka and rum. So we need to think about, well, how compatible is that going to be with our capability, with our manufacturing resources, with our mission, with our vision, with our values as an organization? So we need to ask ourselves, as an organization, do we feel that it's ethical to sell alcohol and to try to get people to increase their usage rate? So if we segment the alcohol category, is it ethical? Is it ethical to sell alcohol and is it ethical to try and increase the consumption rate? So we find out that for some the usage rate is low. Hard to believe, right? But for some the usage rate is low. That means they don't consume a lot of alcohol. For some it's moderate and for some it's high. So is it ethical to try to increase the usage rate of alcohol? We need to think about that. Now, some products fail. In fact, most products that are introduced fail. Why do they fail? Why do companies do market research and then introduce new products only for the product to fail? Because a lot of products fail. Again, most products that are introduced fail. Why? Why would the product fail? Go ahead, Marissa.
One reason is bad timing.
Yeah, the timing could be bad. So you might be You might be 2008, but they're so 2000 late. Or maybe they're 2008 and you're 2000 late. Or one of those. You get what I'm trying to say, right? No, right? I don't think so. We'll get through this. Yes, we can. Did I tell you your success is my #1 priority? Yes. That's why I'm willing to stay here till midnight to help you guys out. I bet I won't be here by myself on the day of the exam. They're like, can we please stay till midnight? Just another half an hour. It's only midnight. Come on, coach. Don't leave us. So, Marissa says bad timing. So maybe you introduced the product before the demand for the product existed. So you were kind of ahead of yourself. You were ahead of the curve. Like, for example, those companies that introduced MP3 players. You probably think that Apple was the one that introduced MP3 players, that they developed the MP3 player. They didn't. They didn't develop the MP3 player. What they did was, now to Marissa's point, other companies had bad timing. They introduced the MP3 player before the market was developed. What Apple did was not develop the MP3 player. What they did was a better job of marketing it. So they introduced the MP3 player and wrapped it in the iPod brand name. And supported that with significant marketing communications, advertising and promotions. And they were obviously very successful with that product. But the companies that initially introduced the MP3 player were not successful because of what Marissa said, just bad timing. What about no point of difference? So an insignificant point of difference is a reason why products fail. You need to differentiate your product from competitors. So there needs to be a point of difference. If there's no point of difference, very likely your product is going to fail. It needs to be different from the competitors. A product could fail because it's poor quality. So if the product is of poor quality, then that's a reason why a product will fail. Also, it's not enough to have a great plan. You need to have a plan that's flawlessly executed. So you know what? You can have a good plan that's flawlessly executed and be tremendously successful. But you can have a great plan that's poorly executed and your product will fail. So, for example, you did a poor job of branding the product, of the packaging, of promoting the product, of advertising the product. So poor execution is another reason why products fail. All right, let's talk about the product life cycle. There's several stages in the product life cycle. What's the first stage of the product life cycle? Introduction. So the first stage of the product life cycle is introduction. So at the time that the product is introduced, we'll call that time 0 here, sales are 0. But then what happens over time as a result of our marketing plan being flawlessly executed, what's going to happen? Sales are going to increase. So this is sales on this axis here. So sales are going to increase. That stage of the product life cycle is known as growth. Now, importantly, as marketers, what we want to do is continue the period of growth. Because if we don't figure out a way to continue to grow sales, to increase the number of units that we're selling of our product, then what's going to happen is there's going to reach a point when sales are going to become flat. Where sales are flat is known as maturity. So sales are no longer growing. So right now we're talking about the product life cycle. We said that the first stage of the product life cycle is introduction. After the product is introduced, and we've had a chance to implement our marketing plan, the marketing communications plan, then sales are going to start to grow. Why? Because we're advertising, and because we have distribution at Walmart and Kmart and Best Buy. So sales are going to start to grow. But what this model is a foreshadowing of what could happen if we do nothing. So there's a cost of doing nothing. So if we stop spending money on advertising, what's going to happen? Sales are going to decrease. And if this goes on for an extended period of time, then what actually could happen is that sales are going to decline. So the product life cycle has several stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Remember, this is a foreshadowing of what could happen. Our job as marketing executives is to make sure and to try our best to keep the product from becoming mature, to keep sales from declining. That's what we're trying to achieve, is to keep sales growing. So we have introduction, growth, maturity, decline. Anything else? What does it say in the book? Somebody. Who has the book? What does it say? Introduction, growth, maturity, decline, and? Is that it? Let's see, you found it, Lena? No? Who found it in the book? Chapter 10, right? It's 11?
If there's something else, it should be 275 or further. If there's
275.
If there's something past the line, it should be on 275.
So, introduction, growth, maturity, decline.
Well, if it passes, that's true.
All right, so now, be astonished, be astounded. So I just wanted to make sure, all right? Watch this. So the book says that there's 4 stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. But I'm here to tell you that there's more stages. That's right. That's right. If you wanted 4 stages, you wouldn't have taken this class with Coach B. There's other professors that can tell you about the 4 stages. I'm here to tell you about the other stages. Go ahead.
Survival?
Well, survival is another aspect, but not a stage in the product life cycle. So after decline, what could happen is what's called obsolescence. So the product could become obsolete. So it's not just that sales decline, but sales basically can go close to 0 or 0. So no sales at all. So obsolescence. So introduction, growth, maturity, decline. So here we're saying sales were growing, it reached a point where, because of market conditions, but also we have to take responsibility as marketing executives. If our sales stop growing, whose fault is that? So of course the category stopped growing, but what are we doing as marketing executives? What are we doing to keep sales growing? Well, advertising, we could spend more money on advertising. That could make a difference. We could modify the product, so add new features and benefits. So look at the iPhone, for example. At one time you could only get it with 16 gigabytes. But how did they get people to keep buying? Well, then you could get it with 32 gigabytes, and then 64 gigabytes, and then 128 gigabytes. You could have gotten it with 128 gigabytes a long time ago, but they're managing the product life cycle. That's what we need to do as executives. We can't just accept this. This is a foreshadowing, remember? That's why this is so tremendously powerful and insightful, is that we need to understand that this is what will happen unless we do our job as marketing executives. We need to manage the product life cycle, not just say, yeah, sales are going to plateau. That's unacceptable. You'll be fired. Fired. F-I-R-E-D. Fired. Want me to do that again? No. Some of my students are cheerleaders. They could come in here and do that. Give me an F. F. So you will be fired. So decline, obsolescence, and then hold on to your seats, folks. You know what else? Revitalization. Revitalization is another stage of the product life cycle. So that you could bring a product back to life. You could reposition a product. Even after sales have declined, you could reposition the product. You could revitalize that product and make it relevant to, let's say, consumers. So those are the stages of the product life cycle. Introduction, growth, maturity, decline, obsolescence, and revitalization.
Can you give an example of it?
Can you?
No, never heard of it.
Of what? Of revitalization?
Yeah.
What about the, yes, go ahead.
Isn't that common in clothing?
The what?
Isn't that common in clothing? Like
Yes, like La Tigre, for example. The La Tigre brand clothing line was very popular in the 80s. Has repositioned themselves in the marketplace, and you can buy their product in Macy's even today. So that doesn't mean that you could get people to buy VCRs now, right? Because VCRs have become obsolete. So VCRs, the first VCR that I bought was, I shouldn't say this out loud, $1,200, because I was an innovator. I bought the first VCR for $1,200, and sales continued to grow until the point where sales for VCRs matured and then declined, and then VCRs are pretty much obsolete now. Because what do people buy instead? DVD players. DVD players. So it's possible to manage the product life cycle. That's what's important to take away. That's not a foregone conclusion. The key takeaway is that we could manage that. We could manage the product life cycle. That's what you need to keep in mind, is that we're able to manage the product life cycle. Now, the adoption curve model is also very insightful. Okay, so the adoption curve model suggests that people don't adopt, they don't purchase the product at the same rate. So they say that early on, there's a group of consumers that'll purchase the product. They want to be the first to purchase the product. They're known as innovators. Then the next group is the early adopters. Then we have early majority, late majority, and finally, laggards. What are laggards? Laggards. Laggards. Laggards are non-adopters. So we have to realize that when we introduce a product that there's some percentage of consumers, for example, that won't purchase the product. But we need to know that there's going to be some non-adopters, some laggards. So when we introduce the product, we're going to sell to innovators. Those are the first to purchase the product. Now our challenge, though, is to figure out what we're going to do. How are we going to modify the marketing mix, the 4 Ps, the product, the price, the place, and the promotion, how we're going to modify that to get the early adopters to purchase now. So the innovators have purchased. How are we going to get now the early adopters to purchase the product? What are we going to do? So we need to modify the marketing mix. We need to modify the 4 Ps so that the next group of consumers in this model, the adoption curve model, will purchase. So this goes hand in hand, this concept goes hand in hand with the product life cycle. So we need to think about them simultaneously in managing our product. So there's different groups that are going to purchase the product at a given price with certain features and benefits, for example. We need to be aware of that. That when we introduce the product, that everybody's not going to purchase. We're not going to sell 50 million units the first year. Over the course of the life cycle, we might sell 50 million, we might sell 150 million units. But we need to understand that there's different needs and wants in the market, and different aspects of the marketing mix are going to motivate people to purchase our product. We need to be aware of that. So we shouldn't think that we're going to sell the whole market in the first year. What we need to do is we need to try to control and influence and manage the rate of adoption. So we don't want the rate of adoption to be too slow. Why? Because competitors could preempt us. So competitors can copy what we're doing. If we don't have a sustainable competitive advantage, they might copy what we're doing. So we could modify the product. We could add new features, add new benefits, change the appearance, change the packaging, change the color, change the storage capacity, change the number of megapixels in the camera. All of those are ways that we could influence the rate of adoption and manage the product life cycle. So modifying the product, changing the features and the benefits, repositioning the product is another way that we could influence and manage the product life cycle. We could also modify the market, which we talked about, new product development and diversification. Those would be good examples. Let's talk about a branding hierarchy. So we said that the brand is what's wrapped around the product. So after we do our marketing research, what we need to do is make it real. It needs to be actionable. And we have to develop strategies and tactics that's going to make it a reality. So one of the things that we need to do is we're going to have to develop a product, and we're also going to have to develop a brand strategy. So there's 3 levels in a brand hierarchy. The first level is the corporate brand. Sometimes referred as the parent brand. So an example of a corporate brand would be Toyota Motor Sales USA. That's a company. That's the corporation. So the corporate brand is Toyota Motor Sales USA. Now, they also have master brands. So in a brand hierarchy, there's a corporate brand, there's master brands, and there could be sub-brands. We're talking about a brand hierarchy. Remember we said that the brand is what's wrapped around the product. Now a company, a successful company, has multiple brands in its portfolio. For a successful company, the single most valuable asset is an intangible asset. It's brand. What do you think the value of the Coke brand is? Now, when I say the value of the Coke brand, I don't mean the value of their manufacturing facilities or their manufacturing equipment. I don't mean the value of their headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. I don't mean the value of all the soda that they have in the warehouses. I don't mean the office equipment. Just what is the value of the Coke brand, that intangible asset? What do you think the value of the Coke brand is? Somebody, go ahead. You guys tell me. What is the value of the Coke brand?
Patent.
How much? How much? Tell me a number. Is it worth 1 million? Is it worth 2 million? Is it worth 5 million? What is the value of the Coke brand?
100 billion.
How much?
100 billion.
100 billion? Anybody else?
Priceless.
How much?
Priceless.
Priceless? Anybody else? Nobody else?
79 billion.
79 billion? That's actually a pretty good guess. You might actually do well on the exam. That's a really good guess. So the value of the Coke brand, just the Coke brand, is about $70 billion, which is really is amazing. Isn't that kind of mind-boggling? Because remember I said that doesn't include the value of the soda that they have in the warehouses. Is that not the value of their manufacturing equipment, which certainly is billions and billions of dollars, but just the value of that intangible asset, which, by the way, they have a trademark. They have a trademark, so that's something that can be a sustainable competitive advantage. So as an organization, we want to have a competitive advantage that's sustainable, right? So a trademark is ideally something that's sustainable. So their brand is estimated to be worth about $70 billion. So a company is going to have several brands, a portfolio of brands. So for Toyota, in their portfolio, they're going to have master brands. They're going to have master brands. What are their master brands? Well, their master brands include Scion, Toyota, and Lexus. So somebody there segmented the market and probably took Coach Beat's class and they said, oh, I get it. I get it. Good, better, best. Yeah, we need to have something at this price point, and we need to have something at this price point, and we need to have something at this price point. So they have, now remember, you can't be all things to all people. So there's only so far you could stretch the Toyota brand. So when they did research, when they did the brand elasticity research, they tried to determine whether or not they could introduce a Toyota at $75,000? Could they sell a Toyota at $75,000? And people said, well, you know something? If I'm going to drop $75,000, I might as well just buy a BMW. Like, I wouldn't pay that much for a Toyota. Now, a Toyota is a great car. It's very reliable. It's very fuel efficient. But in terms of where they're positioned, they're not positioned as being a luxury car. Their competitive set is not Mercedes and BMW. Do you agree? Toyota is a very nice car. It's not cheap. Toyota's cars are not inexpensive. But when consumers were asked in research, they said, if I'm going to spend that much money, I wouldn't see Toyota as being a part of my decision set. So there's other choices. At $75,000, if I was going to spend that much, they would buy a BMW or a Mercedes. They said that basically their conclusion was that the Toyota brand, right, has limitations. Every brand has limitations in terms of its elasticity, its brand elasticity. So what they did was they introduced a new master brand. So Toyota is a master brand. They introduced a new master brand, which is Lexus. These three are master brands. So in the brand hierarchy, there's a corporate brand, there's a master brand, and there can be sub-brands. So examples of sub-brands for Toyota would be Corolla, so the Toyota Corolla, Camry, Avalon, what else? Highlander. So these are examples of sub-brands. Importantly, the way they're marketed is in conjunction with the master brand. Because based on what I said, brands have a tremendous amount of value. So, of course, they wanted to leverage the Toyota brand and not have to introduce Lexus, because in the short run, you're talking about investing over $500 million to create a power brand. To create a power brand, a brand that's going to have a high level of brand awareness and a high level of purchase intent with favorable brand imagery and brand attributes. But it wasn't to be. So they had to introduce, based on the research, a new master brand. And they have a series of sub-brands. Now, importantly, these are marketed together. So the Toyota Highlander. Because what you want to do is introduce a product that's going to leverage your master brand. So now if we started our own company and we introduced a car called Avalon or Camry, how many do you think we would sell? Not many. The reason why Camry sells so well, the reason why the Avalon sells so well, the reason why the Corolla sells so well is because it's marketed as the Toyota Corolla, as the Toyota Avalon. But now, the sub-brand, right, these are sub-brands, so there's three levels: the corporate brand, the master brand, and the sub-brands. Sometimes the sub-brands become so powerful and have such a high level of brand awareness that they can become a master brand. So Camry has actually reached a point in its life that its brand awareness is so high and its brand imagery is so positive that basically you could describe it as a master brand. Because when you look at the vehicles, you don't, on the trunk of the cars, you don't see the Toyota logo. You see the Toyota symbol, but Camry can stand on its own. It has enough recognition and enough awareness and enough positive attributes associated with it, because we want to have brands that are strong with and unique with favorable brand associations. So they still have the symbol there, but they don't have the Toyota logo, the Toyota brand name. So The symbol communicates the brand name, it just doesn't include the name itself. It doesn't include words. So questions about that? This is an example of a brand hierarchy. Corporate brand, master brand, and sub-brands. So this is an example of where they're bringing to life their strategy, the strategy that they developed based on their research. Okay, so briefly we'll talk about multi-product branding. What's multi-product branding? What would be a good example? So what about Sony? Is Sony a good example of multi-product branding? Yeah, Sony is a good example of multi-product branding because they sell a lot of different products, TVs and gaming consoles and what else? DVD players. And what do all those products have in common is they're all branded Sony. So that's an example of multi-product branding. All their products are branded Sony. Now, that's their master brand. They also have sub-brands. Like what? What are some of the Sony sub-brands?
Walkman.
Walkman. What else? PlayStation. Isn't PlayStation a sub-brand of Sony? Isn't it the Sony PlayStation? Come on, gamers. Where's the gamers here? No gamers? Up in here? No? Wow. No gamers. Okay. None of you want to identify yourself as a gamer. So some of their sub-brands include PlayStation, Walkman. What else? Any other sub-brands that you remember? Bravia.
Xperia.
Which one?
Xperia.
Xperia. What else?
No, they have a laptop, but I forgot what it's branded
The Sony Vaio.
as. Yeah.
Yeah. Which they they're not selling that anymore. But for a long time, they had Sony. The Vaio was one of their sub-brands, which is a really nice laptop for pounds. With an i7 quad-core processor. Very, very nice. 1 terabyte hard drive. Let me see. I think it has 16 gigabyte RAM. But yeah, they're not selling that anymore. But that's certainly one of their, you're right, that's one of their sub-brands. And what about, so that's a multi-product branding strategy. What about multi-branding? What is that? What would be a good example? How about, yes, go ahead, James?
Well, in the text that they were talking about, like, the people, I don't know the company's name, but the people who make, like, Arm & Hammer, like, all their, so, like, they'll have different, like, for one thing, they have Arm & Hammer, and then for another product, they have another name for it. It's all the same people. I don't
Okay,
remember
so
the name.
how about, let's take Procter & Gamble. So Procter & Gamble Corporation is, let's say, the corporate brand. Procter & Gamble, that's P&G, Procter & Gamble Corporation. So what they did, which is different from what Sony did, so Sony has a multi-product branding strategy. Sony Corporation. Their master brand is Sony. And what do they brand all their products? Sony. Everything is Sony. Sony gaming consoles, Sony TVs, all their products, and they sell a lot of different electronics, all their products are branded Sony. That's one strategy. Procter & Gamble has a different strategy. Procter & Gamble has a large portfolio of master brands. Unlike Sony, their main master brand is Sony, right? Sony Corporation, their main master brand is Sony. Procter & Gamble has a multi-branding strategy, and for every product type, they have a different brand. So they sell toilet tissue. It's branded Charmin. They sell mouthwash. Is that branded Charmin? No, that's branded Scope. They sell toothpaste. Is that branded Procter & Gamble? Is that branded Charmin? No, that's branded Crest. They sell laundry detergent. That's branded Tide. None of those products are branded Procter & Gamble. Now, of course, Procter & Gamble is their corporate brand. That's the parent brand. And on the back of the package,